We all fell together in harmony. The day disappeared was the day it was free.
YOLO Composing Gloves here, and today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. One more time. It's a pretty cool sound. It's a vocoder sound. With vocoder sounds, you have a lot of options. What do I mean by that? Well, check it out. Let's come into here and just change like one thing, and here's what we get. Like, that's pretty drastic change. It might be something you want to use. If I give it now this is in fact our carrier. If I give it unison and add a pitch difference, maybe a less severe one, that could be a useful thing. You may want that. You may not want that. If I go in and change my modulator, or let's say I move it this way, it sort of messes up our rhythm. We get more of a mid bite before we go into our low end, and that's completely based on the modulator. And if we come into here and just change the pitch of this, even go up, or maybe we go all the way down and we simply change the time stretching algorithm. Like, that's like so different. So this is a very powerful technique, and I'm making just sort of subtle changes here. I mean, we could get really crazy and change these out completely, and we get utterly different sounds. So this was something requested by someone named Hackavator, and they were asking about a bass from a track called Disarray, I believe, by Bad Computer. I gave it a listen. Actually, I listened to it before. It's a great track. And at the drop, there's a bass that has a particular feeling to it. And this bass has, I was like, okay, this is definitely a vocoder bass. And if you listen later on, there is a segment where a vocal speaks through a vocoder that matches the bass. And I was like, oh, yep, definitely a vocoder. There's certain sounds, as you work with vocoders, you begin to just be able to hear it. You're like, oh, it sounds like a vocoder was used. This one was a little tricky because he managed to get rid of the filtery sound of the vocoder by removing some of the high end, which I was like, oh, dang. So I have a setup. I'm going to explain my setup to you and sort of walk you through. First, you'll be able to download this in the description if you're concerned about having every little knob in control. But I really want to give you some techniques and show you why settings are the way they are, instead of just telling you to change your settings to those values. And some of the reasons why I put things in the direction they are. So that's going to be sort of my focus. And they're just really tricky sounds because of the just number of moving parts. So I know mine doesn't perfectly match, and it was made outside of a track, so it sounds kind of out there. One thing I do want to point out, I was asked about the mixing because the person was, Hackavator was like, yo, bro, dude, bro, man. Like, how did they get it to sound so crisp? And it's true, there's a certain crispness to this particular one. And there's the secret to this one is actually the songwriting. If you listen to the amount that's going on right there, it's really almost only the bass. Like, there's the kick and the, I believe it's a clap or a snare, or some sort of mid crunch thing going on. But that's really it. And there's like some general atmosphere, but the bass is like almost all by itself. And so this allows you to bring the bass up hugely, and it just cuts right through the mix, and you can be very aggressive with it. So on this sound, it's actually going through quite a bit of distortion and a transient processor, which I'm using as sort of a distortion process rather than just a transient shaper. It's also acting as a frequency splitter for me. So that's basically what's going on there. It's kind of interesting. So once you've nailed the sound, you just got to make sure you have room in your track. And it's sort of a spacious track, which also adds to the expectation of this space. So there's some other elements there that I'm not going to quite delve into here. So I'm going to assume you're comfortable with what a vocoder is. A very brief recap. A vocoder takes a modulator, and the modulator is basically broken down through a bunch of filters, and it takes a carrier, and the carrier is looked at, and when they have filter frequencies that match, that frequency is allowed to go through, and you get a new sound. So it's basically like like frequency matching, but it's not quite. It's a really crude explanation, but it's like that's essentially what's going to happen. So this means that we are taking characteristics of a modulator, but we actually don't ever hear the modulator, we hear what the modulator lines up to in our carrier. So what we pick as our modulator is going to have a direct impact on the timbre of the carrier. And so that's important for us in this process because we say, okay, that means that when I pick this is going to have massive implications on what it sounds like. That's why changing the pitch doesn't change. Changing the pitch of the vocal doesn't change the pitch of the sound. And you might be going, why is that? Well, it's because this thing is still outputting the same spectrum. So I'm still outputting an F2, but this could change all over the place. It's going to determine the timbre of this sound. So that's what's going down. You might be wondering, like, what does this sound like? And so if I just put it out.
With your eyes, the camera's to your soul.
I know, it's beautiful. I pitched it down because I was looking for a timbre. At the time, it was regularly pitched. I went through several vocals until I found one that I digged. This is the Lori Webb Sings For You. So that's what that is. And the modulator, what's the deal with the modulator? So if you've messed with vocoders before, I already knew that the general timbre of what I was sort of going for was going to be some sort of a low end saw wave. But because of the whole frequency, like the spectrum you generate and the whole matching thing going on, changing this to a square wave has massive implications because we're going to get a squarish texture because now all it has to pick from are odd harmonics. Where over here we gave it, the saw wave series to pick from. So if we play this, you could hear the odd harmonics come right on through. But if I choose the other one, and it makes sense because it's a voice, it's going to have a lot of frequencies in the middle ground. So it'll line up with more of these. Also, if you listen to the track, it sounds like they sort of picked a General Grievous type of vocoder process. And this is how you would make a General Grievous type of voice. So that's what's going on with the vocoder. And that's why I picked the two timbres that I did. The vocals were sort of random, just sort of tried them out till I found something. And then once you get into the vocoder, you're kind of going, okay, I gotta make this sound. And so we've got our sort of the way we're gonna make the timbre, sort of. But now it's like, well, we gotta have some sort of a rhythm. Originally, I was trying to make their rhythm, but I kind of struggled with that process. So I just sort of settled for this because I was like, I don't care anymore. So what I chose for the rhythm, though, is important because it determines sort of the feel you'll get out of the sound. I chose the fruity fast low pass. And I tried two other approaches before I settled on this one. So the first approach was I will just take this and use the filter inside a harmer because this is the carrier sound. So this is the sound you hear. So I just filter it here. The filters inside harmer, though, almost always leave fundamentals lying around if your sound is, when we're working with sounds this low. And so it just won't working out. Like it was always being left over with some sort of rumble. So I got rid of this. I was like, lame idea. See you later. Filter and harmer. The second thing I tried was I put a fruity balance on the channel. And if you know what fruity balance is, it's just a volume knob and a panning knob. And the reason I did this was because I wanted to not have to automate a fader. I wanted it to be an external automation. So that's usually why I grab fruity balance. I'm trying to avoid using the fader because I want to use the fader for, mixing. So I was messing with this, and now there's a difference between volume automation and filter automation in terms of the timbre you get. And I'm going to explain it with a low pass and a high pass because it's easier to understand than with just straight up volume automation. So if I were to filter this with a high pass filter, the first frequency it's going to remove is my fundamental. And think about what that means. That's like where most of your power is at. It's going to remove all the low end first. So your filter movements are going to have this like sort of thinness to them, especially if they're like fast. The first thing you're going to lose is your fundamental. If you add resonance, actually it gets quite interesting. But because of this, I wanted to keep the low end power of the spectrum. And so the feeling of the filter movement I wanted was very specifically a low pass. It almost always is a low pass with sounds of this nature. Volume automation works good too. It removes them all at the same rate. But, well, depending on the volume knob, actually, it's not entirely true. But it just wasn't the type of vibe I was going for. And I settled on the fast low pass because the filter movements are very correlated, meaning sometimes you have a filter that's got like a sloppy cutoff or something. And as a result, when you write a cutoff here, it doesn't quite do the job at the rate you want it. Like when I want like a short sound like this, like boom, boom. Like when I want that, like the fruity fast low pass delivers. Okay. So that's why I picked it. You can pick other filters though. You get a feeling for the kinds of rhythms. There's sort of a sense of it you get as you do it with more of them. And I recommend trying out many different ones. I didn't start with this. I just started with 2 other things, but I went to this because I knew it was going to deliver the type of result. But typically, I'd also go through, try out the fruity, something that has lots of filters, like maybe the Arturi filters, Artura, whatever. Man, I just can't say people's names today. And also the fruity love filter has a whole bunch in there that you can just quickly go through and try them out, see if there's something you want. So anyways, that's going to create a rhythm. So this is our rhythm. And you notice they don't always go to the top. This can have various effects. I didn't need the top part of the spectrum. I have it here at the beginning. You could try it out. It also adds a dynamic touch to your sound. I also picked pretty specific shapes here because, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Because for this first bit, I wanted something long that went through most of the measure. That way I could hear the decay of the sound. And then I wanted something shorter. I wanted to sweep up because it sounded like there was like a whoom at some parts in the filter movement of the sound I was modeling. So I knew I wanted to have one of these and then a short one. Interesting hearing it like it changes character. That's kind of curious. We could talk about that, but we're not gonna. And then I also wanted something that turns up a little bit. It's a subtle thing that's more of a stylistic choice because it sounded like that was in the original as well. So those are the filter movements. So I got a little audition of most of the things I was trying to do. And then we finally get to the vocoder. So, okay, that's just like a whole bunch of stuff. Hopefully you're following everything so far. In general brush strokes, we've set up a modulator, carrier, and now we've got a way to make a rhythm. Let's get some more interesting movement happening now. So one of the things I did was I automated the bandwidth and the modulator bandwidth. And those are just the knobs on the front. So when you originally touch this, mess with these knobs on the front, these first 3, and then make sure this is on if you're going to mess with this one. I didn't like it. I kept away from this. And so these I use to first guide in my timbre. And each one will contribute to the sound in a way. Like I could tell you technically what they do, but honestly, just touch them and get a feel for them real quick because it does vary kind of widely between applications. In this case, this knob right here was very important. Because of that. So I knew I wanted sort of this brighter sound. And this is what it is. The pitch shift. The modulating pitch shift. I actually went in and I think I messed with that envelope as well. Just a smidge. Because I was going for sort of a darker tone. The timbre that was accomplished was quite unique. So it was I'm still like, I didn't nail that. So that's something we could go through and look. The order, I left it on the second. Order is sort of basically like, I can't remember if it's the poles of the filters or if it's the number of filters. This is the number of bands. This is the number of filters. So I believe the order is just because filters can have, various cutoffs. And so this is like up here, this is like really steep cutoffs. And then down here, this is really broad cutoff. So I'm assuming the filters are overlapping more. That's why you get more of the spectrum. And then in the middle, you have like these two are like in between. So that's my interpretation. I have not looked in the manual recently and it's been a while. But anyways, when I touch this stuff, that's what I'm thinking. So anyways, okay. So I decided to modulate some of these in real time. Well, in time with the project. And they add just, subtle little effects. If I bring this down, like, oh, we get a different attack. Bring it up. I like that. We could bring this down. This is the bandwidth. If we were to look at this, you see they get really thin there. Not something we really want. Now mine has quite a bit of a greasy, it has that vocoded sound pretty hard. So perhaps I'd want to mess with this and change it. The modulator bandwidth multiplier is, you can look at this as basically just a tone control. If you like break down the name modulator, so we're dealing with the voice here. Bandwidth multiplier, it's going to mess with the way it's looking at our modulator. That's like the big takeaway here. So if we come in here and we change, for example, the pitch shift, we're going to get a different distribution of timbre. If I move this down. So pretty interesting stuff. There was one thing. So this is the band gain multiplier. You could adjust the gain of bands with a multiplier. And I think I've sort of strayed from the original timbre I had. But anyways, that's what's going on there. And we've gone through pretty much the vocoder. These are settings you're just going to set and reset and really mess with and try different things. I don't believe I touched any other envelopes too much. Oh, I messed with the band distribution. I brought it up a little bit. That's what you get. And then on the... Okay, so the distortion. How'd you get the distortion set up? First, this is basically, you leave it on the linear curve and then just pull it up. This has the effect of bringing the amplitude up quicker, and there's some clipping that's taking place because I'm maxing out up here, but it just takes place earlier essentially. And it gives a little bit of an edge without it. Whoops. Like, that's not beefy enough at all. And then I also have a transient processor. And on this one, the attack's been boosted and the release has been brought down, which are both important for the character of the sound. But I also brought the drive, reasonably up, over halfway. And then I messed with this band split. And check it out. And this is basically affecting what goes into the drive. And I don't know what algorithm is in this drive, but I like it. So I'm basically able to process the mids without processing the lows. So this is a great way of getting at the tone. And then another thing I did was I went through and with an EQ, I shaved off the really extreme low end. And then I saw out a little resonance patch to mess with. So you could honestly go a whole nother level with this part right here if you wanted to. But I saw this more as just trying to isolate like a resonance patch that this bass could use to establish a bite. So yeah, that's pretty much, that's that. If you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day. Walking down the street with the black concrete, I was lowering my shades in the middle of the night. I felt like I was here, like I could steer, but then the jungle came into my sight. Colors fell and shapes appeared. I saw what it meant to disappear. What I thought was you was me. We all felt it.